For 37 years, Sister Evangeline was a fixture in St. Augustine Parish, Louisiana, recognized by all as the most pious person they'd ever encountered. She preached about purity and virtue to the wives of plantation owners, offering counsel to young women about the sacred value of chastity. Her reputation was such that families, desperate to correct the behavior of their most difficult enslaved women, would send them to her convent. There, they hoped for moral improvement through prayer and the strictures of religious life. But when the convent burned down in 1858 and the authorities finally ventured into the cellar, a place Sister Evangeline had strictly forbidden anyone to enter, they found something that would vanish from every church record within 2 days. It was evidence of a secret operation, one that had been producing children, dozens of them, using methods that rendered her sermons on chastity utterly hollow. The church shut down the inquiry without delay, yet the surviving account ledgers offer a clear picture of Sister Evangeline's nightly activities in that cellar. Before we get back to Sister Evangeline and the terrible things she found in her cellar, I have a favor to ask. If this is your first time hearing this tale, go ahead and subscribe, and be sure to turn on notifications. That way, you'll always be in the loop when we explore these shadowy pasts. Let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments. I'm curious about the areas where our community of truth seekers is expanding. Let's find out what Sister Evangeline was actually saying. The case is especially troubling because of the extent of her hypocrisy and how skillfully she hid it behind a religious facade. In 1821, St. Augustine Parish, Louisiana, was home to a population of less than 800 people. They were spread out over plantation, land, and along the muddy roads that crisscrossed the area. The Mississippi River was the lifeblood of the region, shaping trade, dictating the climate, and determining how people lived. Cotton ruled, and the hierarchy was clear. St. Dominic's, the parish church, catered to both the gentry and their enslaved people, though seldom at the same time. Father Benedict Rousseau, the man who'd tended to this congregation since 1803, was starting to show his age. His correspondence with the New Orleans diocese often mentioned his failing health. He also expressed deep concern for the spiritual well-being of the enslaved individuals within his parish. The Sisters of Divine Mercy's arrival that April felt like a miracle, a response to unspoken hopes. The group was small, hardly known, and led by a woman who had adopted the name Sister Evangeline when she took her vows. She looked to be in her 40s, though the way she carried herself hinted at a life lived with more than its share of difficulty. Her French carried a Haitian lilt, while her English was spoken with a deliberate clarity. She moved through the world with the unmistakable assurance of someone who had discovered her purpose. Alongside her arrived 3 more sisters, Sister Marie, Sister Constance, and Sister Beatrice. They were all younger, and they all seemed to look up to Evangeline. The Delmare family, among the parish's most affluent plantation owners, gifted the land for the convent. The property was located 2 miles outside of town, reachable only by a single road. That road turned into a quagmire of mud whenever the rains came down hard. The property sprawled across 40 acres, much of it still wild, with a big house that had seen better days. Several outbuildings, remnants of a failed tobacco operation, were scattered about, once used for storage. Charles Delmare's letter, now in the Parish Historical Society's collection, offered a glimpse into his giving. We are bound by our faith to aid those who guide the spirits of every person, especially those in captivity who need both moral guidance and the solace of their beliefs. Delmare's letter didn't mention the specific agreement with Sister Evangeline. The convent had agreed to accept enslaved women, either bought or given by parish families, to help them spiritually and morally. Evangeline explained that these women were a handful. They'd been troublesome, defiant, or had done things that made them a poor fit for the grueling work on the plantations. The convent's mission was to transform them, using prayer, labor, and religious education as the tools. It appeared to work out well for all involved. Plantation owners could offload problematic land without sacrificing its sale to the southern states. The church could show its commitment to the spiritual well-being of the enslaved. The convent would, in effect, possess a self-sufficient workforce to tend to their agricultural needs. Come summer of 1821, 7 women had joined the Sisters of Divine Mercy: Patience, Ruth, Delphine, Mercy, Hannah, Rebecca, and Grace. These names are all listed together in a single entry within the Del Mar estate records. The participants' ages ranged from 16 to 32. The inscription next to each name simply read, "To the Convent for Reform, Sister Evangeline." During Father Russo's rare visits, painted a picture of the convent's daily life, one governed by a rigid religious structure. The women began their day before the sun even thought about rising. They prayed, then toiled in the fields and gardens. Afternoons were spent in religious study, and they retired after evening vespers. Sister Evangeline reported steady progress in her spiritual development. She described how prayer gradually softened rebellious spirits, and how women learned humility and accepted their situations as God's plan. Father Russo, in his letters, seemed pleased with how things were set up. What he never witnessed, what no one ever did, was the unfolding of events once the sun dipped below the horizon. The convent's central structure, a product of the 1792, was the brainchild of a French merchant. He'd come ashore with lofty dreams, only to succumb to financial ruin before his time. The house's design was a familiar one in Louisiana. It was elevated on brick piers, a precaution against flooding, and featured a broad gallery that encircled the ground floor. The living spaces were situated on the upper level, yet it boasted something uncommon for the area: a complete cellar. Legend had it that the merchant constructed it to keep wines and other perishables at a consistent, cool temperature. The cellar sprawled beneath the whole house, its entrance a trapdoor hidden in what had once been the merchant's office, now Sister Evangeline's personal space. By October of 1821, a mere 6 months after the convent's founding, the mood in St. Augustine Parish had changed. It was an elusive thing, something that defied easy description. Yet plantation owners started recording it in their journals and letters. The once restless, enslaved populations appeared to have calmed. Rumors of escape, shared in hushed tones among the prisoners, never came to fruition. The women, once bold, now averted their gazes, their voices barely audible. The convent, for its part, stayed strangely cut off. Sister Evangeline preferred solitude, believing it essential for fostering a contemplative environment. Father Russo's monthly visits were the sister's sole link to the world beyond, and even those were held in the parlor, complete with tea and religious discourse. The women undergoing reform were absent from these visits. They're in a period of spiritual focus, Sister Evangeline would say, and they can't be pulled away from their prayers and work. The financial records, on the other hand, painted a contrasting picture. Sister Evangeline's meticulous script chronicled it all. Each purchase, each new life, each passing. Yet, the words were crafted in a code so deftly concealed that they seemed utterly benign until the reader grasped their true meaning. The first sign that something was wrong appeared in November 1821, just 7 months after the convent was established. The record simply stated, "Delivered of a male child, 7th day, Mother Deline. Baptism performed by Sister E. Father recorded as unknown. Child placed according to arrangement with C. D." A similar entry appeared within 3 weeks. Delivered of a female child, 12th day, Mother Ruth. Father recorded as unknown. Child placed according to arrangement with H.B. The initials C, D are often used, and H, B. I exchanged letters with Charles Del Mar and Henry Beaumont, both of whom were among the parish's leading planters. Placed according to arrangement became a recurring entry in the ledgers during the ensuing months. By the close of 1822, the convent had seen the arrival of 9 children, all placed according to arrangement. What set these records apart wasn't just the births themselves. After all, enslaved women giving birth was a common occurrence in the antebellum South. The timing, truly, was something else. All the women who came to the convent did so during the spring and summer of 1821. Pregnancy would have been documented if it had been the case when they arrived. By November, however, babies were being born. The math was there, undeniable, but only if you bothered to see it. A new arrival graced the convent in January of 1823. Sarah had been with the Delmare family for 8 years, a fixture since she was a child. The Delmare estate records noted, Sarah, age 19, to Convent for moral reformation following incidents of willful disobedience and attempted corruption of other property in the parish. Attempted corruption carried a particular weight. It meant she'd been instructing others in reading, a forbidden act in Louisiana since 1806. Sarah's presence altered the very nature of the convent's secret workings. Unlike the other women, she'd received an education from the Delmare daughter before the law changed, and she grasped the significance of keeping records. She started seeing things, patterns, almost immediately after she got there. She watched Sister Evangeline, noting the visitors who arrived under the cover of darkness and the noises that drifted up from the cellar after the sun went down. The cellar, in and of itself, was an odd place. By day, it functioned as a cool storage space, preserving the convent's food and the herbs Sister Evangeline relied on for her medicinal preparations. However, changes had been made since the convent's founding. The initial area had been partitioned into a series of smaller rooms, each secured by a substantial wooden door, capable of being locked from the outside. Sister Evangeline, when asked, clarified that these rooms were essential for women experiencing profound spiritual turmoil. They needed isolation, both for their own well-being and to safeguard the rest of the community. By March of 1823, Sarah had already spent several months within the convent's walls. In a letter, smuggled out via a visiting priest's belongings, a letter that would resurface years later, she detailed her discoveries. The sisters aren't bound by vows of poverty, nor do they live as nuns. Sister E runs a business, and we are the product. After dark, men come. Wealthy men from the town and nearby parishes, men whose faces I'd know if I saw them in the light. They come in unmarked carriages. Sister E gets paid in gold and silver, which she writes down in her books. Then, they're taken downstairs. The letter went on, meticulously outlining the grim process. When our time arrives, we're all confined to the cellar rooms. Sister E uses the lunar cycle, along with her meticulous records of each woman's menstrual cycle, to figure out when it's our turn. Once she decides the time is right, the arrangements are set in motion. The men who arrive are those desperate for children, but whose wives are unable to conceive, or those who want children to sell for profit, but can't afford the public disgrace of being involved. Sister E provides the answer. She orchestrates the pairings based on the skin tone and physical characteristics she believes will yield the most desirable offspring. The letter Sarah wrote never found its way to where it was supposed to go. Father Michel Arnaud, the unwitting bearer of the burden, a priest from New Orleans, made a stop at the convent. On his way back, Sister Evangeline offered him supper, urging him to remain overnight because of the ominous forecast. He agreed. By dawn, Father Arnaud was gone. Sister Evangeline informed the diocese that he'd had an apoplectic fit while sleeping. His possessions were sent back to New Orleans, accompanied by a letter expressing sympathy. The letter was missing. Between 1823 and 1835, the convent's activities became increasingly grim. The records from this era, unearthed over time through a mix of chance and family legacies, paint a picture of a system running with the same efficiency as any other Southern business before the Civil War. Sister Evangeline had built something truly original, a breeding program, cleverly masked as a religious undertaking, shielded by the church's sanctity and the convent's remote setting. The entries became more detailed and clinical. A page was devoted to each woman's accomplishments. The subject's physical characteristics were recorded, including height, skin color, hair type, and facial features. The medical observations included careful tracking of monthly cycles, a record of previous pregnancies and their outcomes, and documentation of any complications or difficulties. The visitors were known only by their initials at first. However, a little digging through payment records and subsequent estate papers unveiled their true identities: plantation owners, merchants, and even a couple of parish judges. The lives of the children born within the convent were preordained, each destined for a particular role before they even drew their first breath. Some were sent back to the properties of the men who had financed their creation, their births documented in estate records as the offspring of enslaved women already in their possession. Some were sold discreetly, fetching considerable amounts. Sister Evangeline then allocated these funds, splitting them between the convent's finances and compensating the men who had assisted. The children who fetched the most money were often the ones with the fairest skin and the most European looks. They sometimes vanished into homes in New Orleans, or even farther north, entering lives where their beginnings would remain a secret. The convent grew during this period. 2 more structures went up, officially designated as dormitories. They were built to accommodate the increasing number of women who were coming to find spiritual solace. In practice, they offered distinct accommodations for women, each group corresponding to a specific phase of Sister Evangeline's program. This included expectant mothers, those recuperating after giving birth, and women getting ready for the subsequent round. Sister Evangeline, once a figure of little note, became a woman of significant, though understated, influence. Each year, her contributions to St. Dominic's Church grew. She financed the building's upkeep, bought Father Rousseau new vestments, and offered a substantial allowance for the parish's educational programs, though these were, naturally, restricted to white children. Father Rousseau, in his letters to the diocese, lauded her philanthropic endeavors, never once probing the origins of her financial resources. Yet, a few individuals saw what others missed, the obvious, concealed in the everyday. Estate managers started to notice something. A growing number of light-skinned children were being born to enslaved women who had been at the convent. Wives exchanged knowing glances, their whispers laced with the kind of suspicion that only comes from years of watching a man business trips to street. Augustine Parish, they noted, seemed to happen with alarming regularity. The enslaved people, in their own way, created a mythology around the convent. These were tales shared in hushed tones, cautionary tales for the young, and prayers that they would never find themselves needing to be reformed. A new player appeared on the scene in 1835. Benjamin Traz. He wasn't a planter, nor a priest, but something far more perilous, a newspaper editor. Traz had acquired the beleaguered St. Augustine Parish Gazette, with plans to reshape it into something of real value. He hailed from Philadelphia, a city that shaped him. He held abolitionist views, though he was clever enough to keep them largely to himself. And he had a reporter's knack for spotting stories that didn't quite add up. Trask's initial interest in the convent came about while he was researching a series of articles about the parish's history. He noticed the absence of certain records, baptisms that should have been recorded in church documents, and births that appeared in estate records without any mention of pregnancy in the overseer's journals. He started his inquiries cautiously, using a roundabout approach. He spoke with people who had lived in the area for years, asking them about the parish's various charitable organizations. That particular conversation was especially revealing. Judith Crenshaw, a 72-year-old widow, had been a parishioner since 1799. One October afternoon, she received Traz in her parlor. An hour into their conversation about the parish's founding, she fell silent. Then, she uttered a statement that would alter the course of Traz's inquiry. "You're curious about the convent. I figured someone would be eventually. My dear boy, there are certain matters in this parish that are best left unspoken, and that place is at the top of the list. But if you truly want to know what goes on behind those walls, don't bother with the planters or the priests. Speak to the midwives. In the social structure of the antebellum South, the midwives of St. Augustine Parish held a unique position. They traversed the boundaries of light and shadow, of affluence and subjugation, of life and its inevitable end. They possessed insights that eluded most, were privy to information that official channels never acknowledged, and adhered to a strict code of silence, safeguarding their capacity to continue their vital work. Yet they maintained their own, less formal accounts. These were unofficial, unacknowledged records of the births they witnessed, meticulously chronicled in journals secreted away in trunks and tucked beneath floorboards. Traz's inquiry brought him to 3 women, all of whom had worked as midwives within the parish's borders for the last 15 years. The initial two declined to converse, yet the third, a free woman of color known as Celestine Broussard, consented to a meeting, provided her identity remained a secret. The two spoke in her modest home, situated on the outskirts of town. The shutters were closed, and the door was secured. "I've been present at over 400 births in this parish," Celestine said, her voice barely above a whisper, measured. "I know every woman of childbearing age, regardless of race or status, free or enslaved. I know their cycles, the troubles they face, their pasts. Yet, I've never been summoned to the convent, not in all these years. Sister Evangeline insists she and her sisters manage everything, that it's part of their calling. Do you understand what that means, Mr. Tras? It means she doesn't want anyone to see." Celestine retrieved her own ledger, its pages a testament to her meticulous record-keeping. "I keep a record of every birth in this parish, even those I don't witness firsthand. The enslaved people talk, you see, and news travels fast. I've noticed something strange. Women visit that convent, and then, 9 or 10 months later, babies show up on their home plantations. The mothers usually come back within a few months of giving birth, but the children remain on the estates. The official explanation is always that these women gave birth while still on their home plantations, and the babies were taken to the convent temporarily for the mother's spiritual recovery. But the timing never adds up, Mr. Tras. The women are listed as being at the convent the entire time they would have been visibly pregnant." She presented her records to him. For over a decade, she'd recorded 43 births that didn't quite fit the established timelines. 43 children, their beginnings shrouded in a web of meticulously crafted deception. Tras started his own documentation. He somehow got hold of payment records from various estates that had dealings with the convent, though he never revealed how. The researcher interviewed former overseers who had worked on plantations where women were sent for reformation. He spoke with the merchants who delivered supplies to the convent. The amounts of food, cloth, and medical supplies they brought suggested a larger population than the 4 sisters who were said to be the only residents. The most damaging proof against him emerged from an unlikely place: the convent's own official financial records. To keep up appearances as a legitimate religious organization, Sister Evangeline needed to buy things from the shops in the area on a regular basis. The invoices and receipts, those everyday documents detailing fabric buys, foodstuffs, and medical needs, hinted at something more than what 4 nuns and a few women under their care could account for. The estimated number suggested a permanent population of 25 to 30 people living on the property. However, the documentation wasn't the whole story. Tras had to witness the operation in person, which necessitated a way to get onto the property. He meticulously plotted his course, fully aware that this was a singular chance. His opportunity arrived in February of 1836, a time when relentless rains had rendered the roads nearly impassable. Tras offered to take supplies to the remote convent, a charitable gesture. He filled his wagon with the items Sister Evangeline had requested from different vendors. He showed up as the sun dipped below the horizon, the absolute worst time to be on the move. This, of course, provided a perfectly reasonable justification for asking to stay somewhere overnight. Sister Evangeline encountered him on the gallery, her face a mask of neutrality, though her eyes seemed to be assessing him. She took the supplies, though she couldn't accommodate his wish to remain, pointing to the convent's rigid policies regarding male visitors. Tras kept at it, highlighting the perilous state of the road after dark. At last, and with some hesitation, she consented to let him stay in one of the outbuildings until morning. The outbuilding, she pointed out, was nothing fancy, just a basic shed for stashing tools and other gear. Tras got comfortable, pretending to get ready for bed. He listened, the sound of Sister Evangeline's boots squelching in the muck fading away. Then he waited. Night had settled in, and the shadows deepened. That's when the sounds began, confirming every doubt he'd ever entertained. Voices, a chorus of them, drifted from the main house. He heard the unmistakable creak of a trap door, then footsteps, heavy and deliberate, heading down into the cellar. A woman's cry, sharp and sudden, was quickly silenced. Male voices, low and conspiratorial, at least 2, perhaps 3, followed. The noises persisted for hours, a constant presence. They weren't loud enough to make out any words, but they were there, unmistakably, hinting at actions that no church should ever condone. Just before the first light of day, Traz heard the creak of a door in the main house. He dared a look through a crack in the outbuilding's wall. Two figures appeared, their features obscured by the brims of their hats, and their attire spoke of affluence. They hurried to a carriage, tucked away behind the main house, hidden from view of the road. The carriage was unadorned, lacking any insignia or familial symbols. It vanished from sight, swallowed by the mire of the road leading into town in a matter of moments. Traz arrived back at St. Augustine Parish that morning, armed with evidence that warranted further investigation, though it wasn't enough to warrant publication just yet. He required first-hand accounts from someone intimately familiar with the inner workings, along with concrete evidence that couldn't be easily brushed aside. He needed what every reporter craves: a source, someone who'd talk. The witness materialized in an unforeseen manner during the spring of 1836. Rachel had been at the convent for almost 4 years. She'd arrived, a defiant 17-year-old, plucked from the Beaumont estate. She departed, a woman who had borne 3 children and interred one in the convent's unmarked graveyard. There, in the quiet earth, lay the infants who hadn't made it, their passing acknowledged only by the absence of ceremony, or even a name. Rachel didn't make it out. Sister Evangeline's methods were far too regimented for such a thing. Rachel was sent back to the Beaumont estate, following Sister Evangeline's assessment that her most useful days were behind her. At 21, she appeared much older, and a simmering anger had been festering inside her for 4 long years. And she had something else, too: knowledge. While at the convent, Rachel sometimes found herself enlisted by Sister Evangeline for various chores. This arrangement granted her access to places that were off-limits to the other women. She'd glanced at the ledgers, unable to decipher their contents, yet she'd committed certain patterns and figures to memory. She'd caught snippets of Sister Evangeline's talks with her guests. She possessed knowledge of names, dates, and specifics that were solely contained within Sister Evangeline's secured files. Traz caught wind of Rachel's reappearance via his contacts within the enslaved community. Establishing contact demanded both patience and meticulous preparation. He couldn't just walk up to her. Any contact between a white newspaper editor and a woman held in bondage would raise eyebrows, and fast. He, however, navigated through intermediaries, free people of color who possessed a certain mobility, able to traverse the boundaries of different societies with a measure of ease. The meeting took place, at last, in June of 1836. It was held in a tobacco barn, situated on the outskirts of the Beaumont estate. Rachel, it was said, was busy collecting eggs from the chickens that nested within. Traz posed his questions, and Rachel's responses were delivered in a voice devoid of inflection, as if she'd exhausted every emotion and was left with nothing but the bare bones of the truth. She provided a detailed description of the cellar rooms, including their size, the furniture inside, and the barred doors. She detailed Sister Evangeline's method for selecting women, explaining how choices were made regarding which women would be paired with which visitors. The decisions hinged on physical attributes and Sister Evangeline's assessment of what would yield the most desirable children. She disclosed that Sister Evangeline maintained a clandestine set of records, secured within a locked box in her bedroom, which contained the actual financial details of her activities. Rachel explained that she kept 2 books. The first record, intended for the church, shows the convent's religious and work activities. The second record, however, reveals the truth: every visitor, every financial transaction, every child born, and every child sold. She once said that this second book protected her. If anyone tried to harm her, she would reveal all the names in it, and the resulting scandal would ruin half the parish. She called it her insurance. Rachel offered something even more useful than specifics. She provided the dates and names of future commitments. Sister Evangeline's work followed a set schedule, with wealthy visitors coming regularly. Rachel was aware that, over the coming month, she'd be hosting at least 3 of these gatherings. Traz had a choice to make. He could go ahead and publish his findings, leaning on Rachel's account and the supporting evidence he'd gathered. This would probably lead to denials from the church and his own removal from the parish. Or he could bide his time, collect more proof, and construct a case so compelling that even the influential figures shielding Sister Evangeline would be forced to take notice. He opted to bide his time, a choice that would shadow him eternally. Throughout the summer of 1836, Tras kept at his work, though with a new level of discretion. He was determined not to draw any attention to his inquiries about the convent. He kept a record of the comings and goings of unmarked carriages along the road leading to the convent. Through a clerk who was in his debt, he got his hands on financial records. They revealed strange money transfers. The funds moved from several well-known estates to accounts in Sister Evangeline's name, all based in New Orleans. He also unearthed a chilling truth that deepened the dread. Sister Evangeline wasn't acting solo, and she hadn't conceived this entire operation. Letters, acquired from a former postal worker, hinted that Sister Evangeline had been involved in a comparable scheme in Haiti prior to the upheaval that followed. She'd escaped the island in 1804, joining the throngs of French colonists, and eventually found her way to Louisiana. The Sisters of Divine Mercy, however, had never been formally established as a religious order. Sister Evangeline had fabricated everything, conjuring both her qualifications and her purpose. She aimed to replicate what she'd observed in Haiti, that the most lucrative aspect of the slave trade wasn't the labor of enslaved individuals in the fields, but rather the controlled breeding of them for sale. The remaining 3 women at the convent weren't nuns, despite appearances. Sister Evangeline had brought them in, perhaps against their will, to assist with her work. Marie-Thérèse was her daughter. Sister Constance had once been a woman in bondage, her freedom secured through some agreement that required her to serve. Sister Beatrice was an enigma, though records hinted at her possessing medical knowledge. This skill set proved essential for managing the births and the inevitable complications that followed. By September 1836, Tras had gathered a substantial amount of evidence. He was getting ready to release a string of articles. These pieces would lay bare the convent's inner workings and identify the men who had supported it. He reached out to his contacts in New Orleans and Boston, orchestrating a simultaneous publication of his discoveries across several newspapers. This strategy was designed to thwart any one entity from burying the story. He never saw his work in print. Just as the truth about the convent in Street Augustin Parish was on the verge of being revealed, the story took a turn that even Tras, despite his thorough investigation, hadn't seen coming. If what you've learned has rattled you, and you're hoping for accountability, then please pass this video along to someone else who should see it. Smash that like button to spread the word, and subscribe to stay updated on the answers to puzzles like this. The subsequent events altered the course of everything, and the terror-gripping Street Augustine Parish deepened, revealing horrors no one could have anticipated. Let's see where this takes us. On the evening of October 3rd, 1836, flames engulfed the Sisters of Divine Mercy convent. The fire ignited sometime after the witching hour. By the time the farmers from nearby farms noticed the ominous glow on the horizon and galloped over to see what was amiss, the main structure was a roaring inferno. The wooden edifice, perched atop brick supports meant to shield it from rising waters, inadvertently became a chimney, fueling the inferno. The structure gave way, crumbling into its own basement within a mere 2 hours. Thomas Garrett was the first to show up, his land touching the convents to the east. He later told the parish authorities that when he arrived, the heat was so overwhelming he couldn't get closer than 50 yards to the main structure. Even from that far away, even with the fire's crackling fury drowning everything else, he heard a sound that would stay with him forever. Screams. Not just the screams of 4 women, as the official report would later state. No, it was a cacophony of voices, a desperate chorus, overlapping and rising from the flames that consumed the building. Garrett tried to coordinate a rescue, even as more neighbors showed up. Unfortunately, the fire had already spread too much. The outbuildings were engulfed in flames too, and the sheer heat hinted at several separate fires. Before a bucket brigade could even get going, drawing water from the well, the building was already starting to come down. The screams ceased before the structure crumbled. The cause, whether the smoke or the flames, remained a mystery. What Garrett didn't say in his official statement, but later told his wife, a conversation she recorded in her diary, was something else entirely that he saw before the neighbors got there. As he stood there, still by himself, a rider on horseback appeared, galloping out from behind the barn and heading straight for the road. The man on horseback, clad in a long coat even though the October night was mild, was mounted on a horse of exceptional breeding, the kind only the affluent could possess. The rider spotted Garrett, paused, and then, with a flick of the reins, sent his horse racing down the road toward St. Augustine Parish, vanishing from view. Garrett didn't tell anyone about what he saw. "I knew what I saw," his wife's diary quoted him, "and I knew that talking about it would only cause problems for my family." The man on that horse was someone significant. The way he ran away told me everything I needed to know about who was behind it and who would be safe. The blaze raged on, consuming the darkness. By the time Father Russo and a few parish officials got there at first light, the Sisters of Divine Mercy Convent was a smoldering wreck. All that was left were the charred remains, fallen beams, and the brick piers, which stood like tombstones amidst the debris. The cellar, meant to offer refuge from the blaze raging overhead, had instead transformed into a furnace. The wooden floor of the main level had given way, sending flaming timbers and wreckage crashing down. The underground rooms, now an inferno, were quickly transformed. The official inquiry commenced without delay, spearheaded by Sheriff Edmund Fairfax. His initials, among others, were found in Sister Evangeline's financial records. Fairfax spent 2 days sifting through the wreckage, speaking with the neighbors who had seen the blaze, and then, with impressive swiftness, he put together his report. The verdict: an accidental blaze, probably ignited by a toppled lamp in Sister Evangeline's room. The fire claimed the lives of 4 dedicated women, all of whom had devoted themselves to helping those less fortunate. However, some observers had a different perspective, one that wasn't reflected in Fairfax's account. Jupiter, a slave from a nearby plantation, had the night watch over the tobacco barn. He told his overseer that he'd seen lights flickering around the convent for hours before the fire broke out. These weren't the usual fixed lights of lamps or windows. They were moving, like torches, shifting from one building to another. His supervisor recorded the incident in his personal journal, yet he never brought it to the attention of those in charge. What would be the point, the overseer had written. The truth told by Jupiter wouldn't be accepted in a court of law, and the investigators are not interested in facts that don't fit their preferred story. The cellar, accessible only after the ruins had cooled, unveiled the full scope of the tragedy. Benjamin Traz, masquerading as a church official tasked with documenting the disaster for the diocese, managed to get onto the scene on October 7th, 4 days post-fire. His journal bore witness to his discoveries, the entries becoming more and more unsettling and disjointed as he struggled to make sense of what he was witnessing. The cellar's interior mirrored Rachel's account, split into 5 distinct chambers. Each room measured roughly 10 by 12 feet, and the heavy wooden doors, though singed and partially destroyed, remained in place. Each door bore the marks of a forced barrier, the metal brackets that once secured the bars still clinging to their frames. Though warped by the flames, their function was clear. Within these walls, Trask discovered remnants. He couldn't get an exact head count, given the state of things, but he figured there were at least 15 people, maybe even more. The bodies were huddled close to the entrances and pressed against the walls. Their placements hinted at a frantic attempt to flee the inferno that consumed the upper levels, only to be trapped when the structure finally gave way. In a single room, Trask stumbled upon a sight that almost shattered him. The bodies of what looked like 3 small children, curled up together in a corner. The room held a few other things: a basic cot, a wooden crate that could have doubled as a table, and the charred remains of what once were probably tin plates or cups. This had once been a home, a place where a family, perhaps with children, had lived. They were now trapped beneath the earth, while flames devoured the structure above. Traz's journal entry from that day states, "I've witnessed war, I've seen poverty, I've observed the everyday brutality men visit upon one another in this society of slaves. Yet, nothing I've ever seen comes close to this. A murder so deliberate, so calculated. These people were trapped, locked in rooms that became their graves, abandoned to perish in darkness and fear. As the building above them blazed, the doors were sealed from the outside. This wasn't an accident. It was an execution. He tried to bring his discoveries to Father Russo, asking for a church investigation that would dig deeper than Sheriff Fairfax's quick look. The gathering took place in the rectory of St. Dominic's Church on October 8th. Tross laid out his findings, the barred doors he'd noted, and the body count, which was far higher than what was officially recorded. Father Russo's expression shifted. First, it was a look of growing concern, then a guarded neutrality. "Mr. Tross," Father Russo finally spoke, "I see you're upset. This is a terrible thing, and it's touched everyone. But you need to know, the church's inquiry is done. The diocese has accepted Sheriff Fairfax's report. 4 sisters perished in an accidental fire. That's the official word, and it won't be changed." Trask pressed him, demanding answers about the extra remains, the locked doors, and the signs of multiple fire starters. Father Russo's response was carefully worded, with each sentence carefully chosen. "The state of the ruins complicates any precise evaluation. What you took for extra remnants could just as easily have been animal remains or other organic matter kept in the cellar. The doors might have been secured, a standard practice for properties far from town. And fires, Mr. Tross, are notoriously capricious. What looks like several points of origin could just be the result of a fast-moving fire in a wooden building." The implication was unmistakable. The official narrative wouldn't budge, no matter what the facts, and anyone who kept probing would be dealt with. Trask walked away from that meeting with a heavy heart, knowing he was the only one chasing after the truth, and that the truth was now a perilous thing. He made one last effort to record the truth of what had happened. He tracked down Celestine Broussard, the midwife who'd initially given him proof of the convent's real activities. He discovered her in the act of packing, readying herself to depart the parish. She recounted a visit, a strange one, from 2 men. They'd implied, she said, that her well-being hinged on her erasing all memory of the convent. "I have children, Mr. Tross," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have grandchildren now. I'm afraid I can't assist you any longer. I apologize, but my family's needs come first." She departed for New Orleans that week, her records in tow. The records, potentially holding key evidence, vanished along with her and were never found. Years after her passing, in 1869, her children began a search for the ledgers she'd maintained, curious if they held any historical significance. The search yielded no results. Celestine had either obliterated them, or someone else had taken steps to keep them hidden. Rachel, Traz's key witness, was gone. The documentation confirmed her sale to a slave trader, destined for Mississippi. However, when Traz tried to follow the money, things didn't add up. The trader, whose name appeared in the Beaumont estate records, firmly stated that he had never bought anyone named Rachel. The asking price appeared surprisingly low for a woman in good health and of a certain age. The most important piece of evidence was the absence of any related purchase record in the Mississippi Estate Registry, which Traz had access to. A rumor, circulating among the enslaved but never substantiated, suggested a different story. It was said that Rachel had been at the convent the night the fire broke out. Sister Evangeline, having learned of Rachel's secret work as Tross's informant, supposedly brought her back. The rumor held that Rachel perished in the cellar alongside the others, and her subsequent sale was merely a convenient cover for her vanishing act. The circumstances of Rachel's fate are just one of the lingering mysteries connected to the convent blaze. The account ledgers, Sister Evangeline's meticulous documentation of her work, appeared 3 weeks after the blaze, presenting a puzzle rather than a solution. The box, securely fastened, arrived at Father Russo's door sometime during the night of October 24th. The identity of the person who departed remained a mystery. The box arrived without a word. The lock gave way with a wrench, and the door swung open to reveal 2 sets of ledgers. One set contained the standard records, the kind that could withstand a casual glance. The other, however, held the meticulous accounts of Sister Evangeline's actual operations. Father Russo summoned an urgent meeting of the parish leaders shortly after the box was opened. Sheriff Fairfax, Judge Nathaniel Crane, Henry Beaumont, Charles Delmary, and 3 other well-known planters were all in attendance. 4 hours passed in the meeting. The specifics of the conversation are lost to us, Yet the result was unmistakable. The ledgers needed to be managed. Judge Crane, his initials a frequent presence in the meticulous records, took custody of the papers. He planned to examine them for the church's official archives. The fate of those ledgers sparked speculation and fueled rumors for years on end. Some said they were destroyed right away, incinerated to erase any trace of what they held. Some believed they were secreted away, a form of protection for influential figures seeking an advantage over their contemporaries. Another theory suggested that the ledgers were sent to the New Orleans diocese, where they were kept in a vault and marked as never to be opened. The ledgers, regardless of what happened next, vanished from the public eye. Only bits and pieces remained. The lone page, unearthed in 2003, along with scattered mentions in private letters and journals. These were penned by individuals who had, for a fleeting moment, laid eyes on the documents before they disappeared. The available evidence supported Rachel's account and Traz's suspicions. However, it was not enough to fully explain Sister Evangeline's activities or to create a complete list of the men who had used her services. The victims were laid to rest on October 10, 1836, a week following the devastating fire. Father Russo presided over the service at the convent with a small gathering of parish officials and a few onlookers from the neighborhood. The mass grave was located in the northwest corner of the property, a distance from the remnants of the structures. Coffins weren't used for individual remains. The bodies were interred side by side, a layer of lime followed by earth. A plain wooden cross and a stone marker were erected, bearing the inscription, "Sisters of Divine Mercy and those under their care, called home October 3, 1836. May perpetual light shine upon them." It was a quick service. Father Russo recited the usual prayers for the deceased. He didn't, however, name the people whose bodies were being interred, nor did he touch on the details of how they had died. The parish burial record listed Sister Evangeline, Sister Marie, Sister Constance, and Sister Beatrice. However, the marker's mention of those under their care was not included in any official documents. Thomas Garrett was present at the burial. In a letter to a cousin, he observed that the grave appeared oddly spacious for just 4 people. Furthermore, the volume of dirt needed to fill it hinted at a far greater number of remains than the official count. He also observed something else. Several affluent planters, seemingly unrelated to the convent's charitable work, attended the service. These men kept their distance from the other mourners, departing right after the final prayers. They didn't linger to offer condolences or even chat about the tragedy with those nearby. They arrived to make sure it was done, Garrett noted, to witness firsthand that the proof was gone and the story was over. In the weeks after the funeral, Traz made one last push to get to the bottom of things. He journeyed to New Orleans, seeking support from the city's more influential figures. He hoped to find officials who might be willing to investigate the strange circumstances surrounding the convent fire and its consequences. He sat down with editors from 2 different newspapers, laying out his evidence and making the case for a formal inquiry. The editors, both of them, heard him out. They were both appalled by what he recounted, and in the end, neither of them took the bait. The consistent reason was the powerful positions of the people involved, the circumstantial nature of the evidence after important documents were destroyed, and the political situation, which made it impossible to pursue a story that would embarrass the church and some of the state's most important people. One editor, after hearing Traz out, said, "Honestly, even if every word you speak is accurate, putting it out there would achieve nothing but your own demise, and maybe mine too. These men have the means to shut down newspapers, to destroy lives, to make people vanish. I have a family, Mr. Traz. I can't get involved in this." Traz sold his newspaper in January of 1837. The new owner promptly changed the paper's name and redirected its editorial focus toward agricultural news and social announcements. He departed Louisiana that very month, making his way back to Philadelphia. There, he took up work in his brother's printing shop, a place where the most contentious tasks involved printing billheads and wedding invitations. He never returned to journalism, though he maintained his journal. He kept adding to it, documenting the convent case whenever fresh details surfaced. In 1842, he recorded the passing of Father Russo. The old man had died peacefully in his sleep, a release after a string of strokes had gradually rendered him less and less able. In 1851, he noted the passing of Sheriff Fairfax, a hunting mishap that, in hushed tones, some suggested was anything but an accident. Fairfax, it seems, had started hitting the bottle hard, and his tongue had loosened considerably, spilling secrets that should have remained hidden. In 1859, he observed with a certain grim pleasure that Charles Del Mare had met his end in financial ruin, the plantation taken for unpaid debts, and his family dispersed. Each death, every calamity that touched those connected to the convent's workings and its concealment, Trask noted with the words, "One more debt unpaid." Yet, in his later years, his entries took on a more contemplative tone, and he recognized that the victims would find no earthly justice. In 1863, he wrote that the guilty would die peacefully, respected by their communities, mourned by their families, buried with honor in church cemeteries. In contrast, the victims would remain nameless, their bodies in an unmarked mass grave on land now used for cotton. This shows the basic unfairness of power. Those who have it avoid punishment, while those who don't suffer without acknowledgement or justice. The women who endured the convent system, those who weren't present when the fire broke out, bore their trauma quietly. Even after the 1865 emancipation, which granted them legal freedom, most never uttered a word about what they'd been through. The handful of people who shared their experiences found few willing to listen. The accounts were gathered piecemeal, frequently years or even decades after the fact. Researchers and social workers, driven by a desire to capture the complete truth of slavery's atrocities, were the ones doing the collecting. Dinah, a woman interviewed in 1879, offered one such account. Her testimony was collected by a philanthropic society, which was then investigating the circumstances of those who had been freed from slavery. Dinah, then 73, recounted her 2-year stay at the Sisters of Divine Mercy Convent, a period she dated to the early 1832s. The information she provided matched the little we already knew about the operation. The cellar rooms, the nighttime visitors, Sister Evangeline's careful record-keeping, and the births and separations of children from their mothers. "We knew what we were there for," Dinah said, her voice steady. Sister Evangeline, she laid it out for us. The first day we were here, we were to be fruitful and multiply, and the fruit we bore would be sold for the glory of God and the profit of the righteous. She claimed it was God's will, that we were serving a higher purpose. But we knew it was the same as any plantation, just dressed up in church language and behind closed doors. The worst part wasn't what they did to our bodies. The hardest part was losing our babies right after they were born. She knew they'd be taken if they survived. We never got to hold them for more than a few hours, never got to give them names, and never got to keep a single one. Dinah's statement, preserved in the Philanthropic Society's archives, provided important confirmation of the convent's activities. Yet, the article surfaced in a publication with a small readership, and it went largely unnoticed initially. In 1879, the South was still grappling with the aftermath of the Civil War, and the process of Reconstruction was in full swing. For many, recounting the particular atrocities of slavery felt like picking at scabs, reopening old wounds that were, perhaps, best left to mend. Dinah's story, like countless others, was tucked away in a collection of slave narratives. These accounts, precious to historians of the future, were mostly overlooked by the people of her time. The land that once held the convent saw a succession of owners in the years after the blaze. The land was cultivated by each successive owner, who planted either cotton or sugarcane, dictated by the prevailing market conditions. The cellar's remnants were buried in the 1842nd, then concealed and cultivated. The mass grave persisted, even as the wooden cross succumbed to decay, never to be renewed. The stone marker endured for a time, though by the 1882nd, it was in pieces. Whether this was a result of intentional vandalism or simply the work of a plow or other farm machinery remains a mystery. By the turn of the century, the convent, the blaze, and the souls lost within its walls had all vanished without a trace. In contrast, local memory proved to be more lasting than physical markers. Tales of the convent found their way into both white and black circles, though the narratives themselves diverged. For the white residents, the narrative was straightforward. A convent had existed, a devastating fire had occurred, and the sisters perished while carrying out their good works. Some versions added Gothic elements, like strange lights or sounds, to the original story. This transformed the actual horror into ghost stories. These stories then obscured the truth instead of revealing it. In Black communities, the stories told were often more specific and more disturbing. The older generation cautioned their daughters and granddaughters, drawing on the convent's story to illustrate how malevolence could masquerade behind a facade of piety. Some accounts suggested the women had deliberately ignited the blaze, a final, desperate act of defiance against their circumstances, opting for flames over a life of continued subjugation. Other accounts suggested that Sister Evangeline started the fire to destroy evidence after she learned about Trass's investigation. Another story floated around, this one implicating a rich benefactor. Apparently, he was worried about being found out, and, to shield himself and his associates, he had the convent razed. All three versions were shared, and it's possible that each contained some truth. The destinies of the convent's children were anything but uniform. Their lives diverged significantly, shaped by their looks, the conditions surrounding their arrival, and the desires of those who acquired them. Many were born into bondage, toiling on the very plantations that had claimed them, their pasts a mystery. In the antebellum South, people with lighter skin and European features often integrated into white society through a process that was common at the time. These individuals were raised as white children, their origins deliberately hidden, and their connection to their enslaved mothers erased. A fragmentary account suggests that before the Civil War, at least 3 children from the convent were sent north. These children were bought by abolitionists who thought they were freeing enslaved children, but who may not have fully understood the circumstances of their birth. These children were given new names and identities, and they grew up in free societies where their past was never discussed. The truth of their beginnings, if ever known, is lost to time. The most devastating cases involved children who passed away far too soon, either at birth or during their early years. Sister Evangeline's ledgers, before they vanished, supposedly included a distinct section detailing these deaths. She recorded them with the same clinical precision she used for births and sales. The lone remaining page from the ledgers bears 3 entries at its base. Each one records an infant's death, the causes cited as failure to thrive, fever, and, most troublingly, misadventure. The use of that final term, misadventure, in the context of an infant's passing, hints at possibilities that are difficult to fully comprehend. The complete story of Sister Evangeline's work will remain forever unfinished. The loss of too many records, the passing of too many witnesses before they could testify, and the successful efforts of powerful people to hide evidence that would have implicated them all contributed to the situation. From the remnants, a portrait of the operation comes into focus. It ran for 17 years, remarkably well, shielded by institutional might. The system, in turn, treated people as assets, to be used however they could be made to yield a profit. Sister Evangeline, a woman of mystery, continues to be just that. The few remaining descriptions portray her as intelligent and organized, but also as lacking in conventional empathy and convinced of her own moral superiority. She seemed to think her work was both lucrative and ethically sound. She believed she was offering a service to men who wanted it, all the while civilizing enslaved women through religious teachings. The ability to justify systematic exploitation as a charitable act highlights the deep moral corruption that slavery created in those who supported and benefited from it. The blaze that consumed her operation leaves behind a trail of questions, the kind that will likely never find a conclusive answer. Or was it something else entirely? Something the official story didn't quite capture? Did Sister Evangeline, in a final act of defiance, choose to obliterate everything rather than risk being found out? Did a benefactor with deep pockets orchestrate the scene, erasing any trace of what happened and silencing anyone who could speak? Or, as some accounts suggest, was it a desperate act of defiance by the women imprisoned in the cellar, a choice to die by fire rather than continue to be exploited? The available evidence is contradictory and incomplete. The presence of several ignition points strongly indicates that the fire was set intentionally. The barred cellar doors suggested a grim purpose. The people within were meant to perish. The sighting of the enigmatic horseman, making a hasty exit, points to someone beyond the immediate circle. Sister Evangeline's last entry, the one that hinted at a conclusion, paints a picture of her as the possible instigator of the chaos. Maybe it was a tangled web. Sister Evangeline, perhaps, igniting flames to erase traces, a benefactor with deep pockets making sure no one lived to tell the tale, and events careening out of hand, culminating in a slaughter. It's clear that traditional ideas of justice were never fully achieved. The guilty went unpunished. The victims were anonymous, their identities erased. The truth was successfully hidden, maintained by a combination of institutional power, social pressure, and the willing cooperation of those who had a lot to lose if it was revealed. The Catholic Church's involvement in the convent's functioning and the ensuing concealment continues to spark debate among historians. Some historians argue that the church leaders were genuinely misled by Sister Evangeline's carefully constructed image of religious devotion. Some people see the investigation's quick conclusion and the hiding of evidence as proof of intentional involvement. The reality is probably a bit of both. Father Russo and others in the local church hierarchy might have turned a blind eye, opting not to scrutinize an operation that appeared to fulfill several functions. Meanwhile, higher-ups in the church acted swiftly to manage the fallout once the complete picture came to light. The diocese's stance, still held, is that the Sisters of Divine Mercy were precisely as they presented themselves, a modest, sincere religious order that met with a heartbreaking fate. Researchers have repeatedly been turned away when seeking access to diocesan archives connected to the convent. Officials have consistently cited privacy as the reason, along with a desire to safeguard the reputations of those not involved in any wrongdoing. The continued refusal to allow independent review of any remaining records suggests that, even after almost 200 years, the complete truth is still considered either too dangerous or too embarrassing to be revealed. Benjamin Trask passed away in 1881, having lived to the age of 73. He died in Philadelphia. His family kept his journal safe, a treasured heirloom that traveled through the years. Eventually, a great-grandnephew, in the 1922nd, gave it to a historical society. For decades, the journal remained largely untouched in the archive. It was catalogued but not studied, and its importance wasn't recognized until a graduate student in the 1982nd, researching the slave breeding systems of the antebellum South, discovered Trask's detailed records. Dr. Helen Marchand, the researcher, spent 15 years trying to confirm Trask's claims and uncover the full history of the Sisters of Divine Mercy Convent. Her contributions were significant, yet unfinished. Much of what Trask had painstakingly copied was lost to time. The individuals he'd spoken with were all gone, and the very place he'd visited had been built over, then rebuilt, obliterating any remnants of the original structures. However, Dr. Marchand's investigation confirmed enough details comparing names in Trask's journal with estate records, finding property transaction documents, and locating descendants who had fragments of family stories to show that Trask's account was mostly accurate. Dr. Marchand's 1997 book, Breeding the Future, Sister Evangeline and the Hidden Economy of Slavery, published by an academic press, didn't exactly set the world on fire. Its reach was, shall we say, modest. The topic sparked some debate among Louisiana historians, particularly regarding the implications for the Catholic Church's role. However, this discussion mainly stayed within academic circles. The convent's activities, and the events that transpired within its walls, largely escaped the notice of the wider world. The haze remains. The site of the former convent has since been transformed into a residential subdivision, a development that took place in the 1952nd. Today, there's no sign of the past, no recognition of the events that unfolded there. The residents of Mercy Lane and Chapel Road remain unaware that their homes occupy land once used to exploit enslaved women. Furthermore, This very ground witnessed the deaths of at least 18 individuals in a fire, an event that likely constituted mass murder. The location lacks any historical marker. No memorial exists to honor those who suffered. If the mass grave remains undisturbed beneath the new construction, its occupants rest in eternal quiet. In 2003, a single page from Sister Evangeline's ledger, discovered in a New Orleans archive, sparked a momentary flurry of public curiosity. The local news, in its coverage of the breeding nun of Louisiana, leaned heavily on the sensational, sidestepping the more profound issues of institutional involvement and the pervasive brutality of slavery. Interest waned after a matter of weeks, and the narrative slipped back into the shadows of scholarly neglect. For the descendants of those who suffered in the convent, the lack of recognition and a memorial represents an ongoing injustice. Descendants have attempted to place a marker at the location, yet they've encountered pushback. The homeowners association and the property owners themselves are concerned that recognizing this painful past might negatively impact their property values. The ongoing conflict between historical accuracy and current societal comfort, specifically the challenge of honoring victims while also maintaining pleasant neighborhoods, remains unresolved. The broader implications of Sister Evangeline's work extend beyond Louisiana, and even beyond the institution of slavery. Her story shows how easily evil can become part of an institution, how it can be hidden behind a facade of virtue, and how those with power and privilege can protect it. This demonstrates how victims can be silenced, evidence destroyed, and the truth hidden. This happens not because of a large conspiracy, but because of the natural agreement between people who benefit from keeping quiet. Moreover, this highlights the specific cruelties that oppressive systems inflict on women, treating their bodies as commodities, taking their children, and ignoring or denying their suffering. The women in Sister Evangeline's convent faced a triple burden. First, the system of slavery, which treated them as property. Second, Sister Evangeline's exploitation of their reproductive abilities. And third, the historical erasure that left them nameless and unacknowledged, even after they died. The fact that this operation lasted for 17 years, was protected by both religious and governmental groups, and was kept secret for so long, raises important questions about American history. This suggests that the events at the Sisters of Divine Mercy Convent were not an unusual occurrence, but rather a clear example of widespread practices and attitudes. This situation requires us to consider what other stories are hidden, what other terrible things have been forgotten, and what we owe to the victims whose names we will never know. The enigma presented here reveals that the atrocities of slavery permeated every facet of antebellum society, extending well beyond the confines of the cotton plantations, and that these very horrors were frequently enacted by individuals who professed moral and religious superiority. Sister Evangeline's surgery succeeded because it served the interests of powerful people, generated profit, and was protected by institutions that prioritized their own reputations over justice for those who were exploited. The ease with which she twisted the language of compassion and kindness to hide her systematic exploitation highlights the deep moral failure of the system that allowed her actions. What are your thoughts on this tale? Do you think we've seen it all? Or are there still hidden truths, dark and twisted, resting with the remains under the homes on Mercy Lane? How many similar operations, shielded by the same code of silence, were out there? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. If this story piqued your interest, and you're craving more chilling narratives from America's shadowy history, consider subscribing. Don't forget to activate the notification bell. And feel free to share this with a fellow mystery enthusiast. The past lingers, always. It remains, a presence still, a story yearning to be told, a question echoing. Why are the voices of the wronged silenced, while those who gained are celebrated with statues and accolades? Catch you in the next one.